All right, everyone. Today we're going to continue on with our lab. Today we will be discussing group policy. And group policy is really just kind of a way to manage and apply policies to a group. That's why it's called group policy. So, first thing we're going to go ahead and do, log into our desktop machines. Make sure our machines are turned on. And then let's go ahead, and the first thing that we really have to do is find a picture. And what I mean by picture, I mean literally anything. Google search something, find it, doesn't matter. I have mine right here. I just pulled this from one of my websites that I have. And it is a JPEG picture. So make sure that it is a JPEG. You save it as a JPEG. Put it on your desktop and call it background. Now, as you can see it on mine here, this is how I have it. All right. So what we're going to do from there is that we have a couple things that we have to make sure that we get situated first before we continue on. So this is a very important step process, so make sure that you follow along thoroughly. All right, so make sure you have your background. Make sure it is a JPEG file. If it is not, if it's a PNG or whatever it may be, that's fine, but I would prefer a JPEG just to make things easier. And it can be anything. It doesn't matter. I don't care what the picture is. So what we're going to do, first thing we're going to do is that we're going to create. So we're going to go to this PC. We're going to go to our root C drive. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a file share here. So we're going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this background share. Now keep it all one word, and I'll explain why in just a second, especially when it comes to UNC naming convention, which again I'll talk about in just a second. Keep it all one word, and it's just a little bit easier to work with. So it's called background share. So right now this is just a folder on the local server. We're going to right click on it, and we're going to go to share with, and then we're going to type in specific people. Now, since what we're ultimately going to do is we're going to change the background of our Windows 8 machine after we join it to the domain. What we're going to do, since we want everybody to be able to have access to it, we're actually going to assign a group of permissions to it. So let's look at it real quick from a file permission standpoint, is that we have me. I'm the owner of it. I'm creating it. I have read, write, and delete, and pretty much all access to it because I'm the creator of it. There are other things that I can find in here. So I can search for any group that's in the domain. So let me check names, and we'll actually be able to bring up groups here as domain users, guests, controllers, computers, admins, so on and so forth. Since really what we want to do is we're going to actually cancel out of this. What we're going to do is we're going to have this is a catch-all, and this is a Windows default one, and it's called everyone. And in case you were wondering, that literally means everybody. Anybody and everybody has access to this file share. The permission level will keep it read, just from a security standpoint. Generally, you wouldn't give everyone access. You can do an umbrella hierarchy if you want. You can do like domain users or something like that. And it really depends on what you're trying to do. Really, in this situation, we want everyone to be able to open this file share and view the file in it. So we're going to make sure everybody is in there, everyone, excuse me, and then we're going to make sure read is on there as well. After we're done with that, we can definitely keep ourselves in there. We have to keep ourselves in there. After that, hit the little share button, and it takes a second, and then you get this. The folder is shared. All right. So what we're going to actually end up happening, and then what we'll get is a network share. Now, this is something called UNC naming. That's a universal naming convention. And the way it works is these are how computers work when it comes to names and file shares. So you can see right now is that it starts off with / and then Alloway-DC1. That's the name of the computer. And then under that is background share. So what this really is kind of reading is that you kind of read it from right to left. Is that it's the background shares the folder. What's above it would be the Alloway-DC1. And Alloway-DC1, of course, is this computer. So let's go ahead and double click on it, and we'll notice that we are on Alloway-DC1 / background share. So this is the file share. Now anybody in any computer on the network can type in this exact phrase / Alloway-DC1 / background share. And if they type that in, they'll be able to get to this folder. Now this folder right now is not available, or I mean there's nothing in it, so let's add some stuff to it. So first we're going to drag, we're going to add the background to it. So it's background.jpg. All right, so what we're going to do is that we're going to open up a notepad. So you can just hit run, and Windows R is the one I always use, the Windows button and R. If you're on a computer that has the Windows button on the keyboard, some of them don't, especially like Macs, obviously, if you're using this. Open up Notepad or whatever program, Word, it doesn't matter, anything that we can put a line of text in. So we're going to open up Notepad here. And what we're going to do is we're going to click up here. We're going to Control-C. We're going to copy it. Go ahead and paste it in there. Now, we're going to continue this UNC naming file. And then we're going to go right here. And what we're going to do is how it says background, we're actually going to type that in. Background.jpg. Okay, so let's look at this. This notepad says that background JPEG, so this particular file is located in the background share on the Alloway-DC1 computer. So that's how you read that kind of verbosely. We're going to keep this up because we're going to copy that here in just a minute. But for right now, let's go ahead and minimize everything we're working on. And we can actually close out of this now. And we'll minimize that as well. All right, so one other thing that we have to do, so this is going to be the next step, is that we're going to go to Start Menu, Windows Administrative Tools, then we're going to go to Active Directory, Users, and Computers. So we're going to click it, and this should, when it pops up, look very similar to us as we've used before. We created these various OUs, the Lab User OU, and we created our user account in it. We have obviously the domain controllers OU and everything. Now, I'll explain here a little bit more of what these actually will allow us to do when we get into the group policies. However, right now we want to right click on Alloway Lab or whatever yours may be. We're going to go to New, Organizational Unit, and we're going to call this Desktops. So we want to make sure that that's protected from accidental deletion. So that will be checked by default. Okay, so right now we have it's a generic OU called Desktops, and there is nothing in it. Not yet anyway. We'll keep it this way as it stands. So let's go ahead and minimize that. All right, now we get to the fun stuff. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to go back to the Start menu, Windows Administrative Tools. We're going to open up Group Policy Management. So inside of Group Policy Management, yours may look something like this. And just so you guys are aware, this is not the Triforce or anything like that. This is actually a forest symbol. Now, we'll explain this, and I believe that is next week. We'll actually get into the forest structure. It's either next week or the week after. I don't remember right now. But we'll explain what a forest is versus a domain. So within that, you'll have the Alloway Lab. And then within that, you'll have domains. Within that, you'll have the name of your domain. And then inside of here, you'll see within your domain, you have various OUs. So obviously, we see that we have domain controllers, lab OUs, and desktops. These we've created already, except for the domain controllers. That was created by default. So yours should look very similar to what mine does. Obviously, you'll have a different name for your domain, of course. So let's open up the Group Policy Objects tab. So you should have two, and these are both default, as they explain. Default domain policy and default domain controllers policy. So let's look at the default domain policy real quick. So we're going to look over here on the right side, and this shows us a couple of different things. The first is the scope. All right, and the scope is that where is this located? First and foremost, what is this domain control or default domain policy? Where does it link to? What does it affect? So this is where we mention in here where it links to. And in this instance here, it's actually attached to the default domain. And if we look up here, we see the default domain policy is attached to the domain. So what that means is that at the very top high level, that the default domain policy hits this domain, and automatically everything underneath of it, desktops, domain controllers, every single thing underneath the OU will inherit this. So sometimes we don't always want that to happen. So I'll explain that in just a minute here. So what we can do is we can apply to certain things. That the settings in this GPO can only apply to the following groups, users, and computers. So let's go to details. Now the details of this are, there's nothing you really need to concern yourself with. Basically what it's just saying is that when it was created, when it was modified last, and of course the version of it. And that's the Active Directory version of it. So if we click on settings, this is where we can actually see what this does. So what are the policies that this group policy is taking care of? So we'll notice is that there's several things, and again, this is hierarchical if you want to look at it this way, is that we have a general, we have certain things underneath of it. These are all things that we have seen before over here in some form or another. Just a little bit easier way of putting it. But really what we're concerned about is the two different kind of configurations. There's a computer configuration and then there's a user configuration. So obviously the computer configuration takes care of policies for the computer, whereas the user configuration will take care of policies for the user. Pretty simple. So if we break this down under computer configuration, we click policies, we have Windows settings, and then underneath that we have something called security settings. So let's click on that. We have some more settings. Now these are the actual settings that this particular group policy is taking care of. So first one is that account policies and a password policy. So this is a default policy. So remember that I did not create this. This was created automatically. Here are the policies and the actual settings that these guys are configuring. So first, enforce password history is that 24 passwords are remembered. So you cannot repeat your password for more than 25 times, or 24 times technically. Maximum password age, 42 days. After that it'll expire. Minimum password age, 1 day. That's again is that as quickly as you can change your password. So you can't continuously change your password over and over and over and over again. Password length, password must meet security requirements. Complexity requirements. Complexity requirements really are, the special character. It's got to have one of, or 3 of 4 different types of things. A special character, uppercase, number, and lowercase. It's got to be X number of characters, so on and so forth. So this is where all of this is taken effect here. If you want to change it, this is where you can do it. We can modify this particular policy. Some other things, for instance, account lockout policy is that if you type in a password an incorrect number of times, it will lock your account out. Now, reading this is at account lockout threshold, 0 invalid login attempts. So if it's 0. So what does that mean? Really what it's kind of referring to is that this is not configured. It's configured, but it's not set. I guess we can think of it that way. It's a little bit easier. So if I were to change this, however, to a valid number, meaning that if I had 1 and I accidentally fat-fingered my password once, it would lock me out for a period of time. And I can specify that period of time as well within here, is that I can have it for, X number of minutes or hours or whatever it may be. All of that's taken care of through in here. Let's look at the Kerberos policy. So this is something that I'm hoping everybody at least remembers the word. So here's our Kerberos information. So maximum lifetime for a service ticket, 600 minutes. User ticket, 10 hours. Service ticket is going to be something that is a service account. That's going to be done through something on Active Directory side. You'll create an account for a specific service. For instance, you have a SQL service. That service has to have a user to bind to, so you create a service account that nobody else can log into except for that particular service. User ticket, 10 hours. And maximum lifetime for a renewal, 7 days before you have to renew it again. Now, as we've said already, maximum tolerance for computer clock synchronization is 5 minutes. Now, we can change this. We can change it to whatever we want. There's a reason why this is set at 5 minutes is because that's a security reason. So I'm not going to go too much further into that. I've discussed Kerberos kind of to the T's here, if you will. Some of these things here we're not going to really super worry about. Some of these are settings, which I'll explain here in just a second. We're not really going to look at too much more of these here. But look at the user configuration. There isn't any. So there are no user configurations on this particular policy. Now, if I wanted to modify this policy, I can right-click and I can click Edit. And that'll bring up this screen right here. And this screen right here will show us all of the configurations for the computer and also the user policies. So if we go into the computer policies, we can see some of these things that are set. We can see these are just some of the things that we can actually do. These are just small ones. These are kind of generic ones as well. For instance, like power options. If I do, I can right click and I can create a new power option. Now these are for old Windows. Most of these preferences and control panel settings are not necessarily used here. What we actually use are going to be in the policies themselves. Now there's a nice large number, and it's the ADMX, it's Active Directory, it's just management files, and basically what these are templates. These templates allow us to do various things, and let's look at just a couple of them here. For instance, as we can see, these are all of the different things that we can configure. Let's see, let's look at some. Let's get rid of network. Let's look at control panel personalization here. We'll be playing around with this here in a little bit. Okay, so let's say I want to changing force a specific start background. All right, so on the start background, now this is on a Windows 8 and above, is that the start background is there's a default one. However, if we want to change one, and you'll see this at Tri-C, is that we all have specific ones, we can actually put ones on there. So for instance, and I'm just going to use this guy as an example, it forces a start screen to use one of available backgrounds, 1 through 20, prevents users from changing it. If the setting is set to 0, not configured, start uses the default background, and users can change it. If the setting is to a non-zero value, start uses the specified background, and users cannot change it. And if it's not supported in the background, the default background is used, but they still cannot change it. Now, we have 3 options up here, is that we have not configured, enabled, or disabled. By default, everything except for obviously this default domain policy tab here, all the things that have been changed, by default, everything is not configured. We can either enable it or disable it. So think about it from this way. If I enable it, then I am enabling the policy, not enabling a force of a specific start background in this instance here. So for instance, I'm going to hit enable. Now remember, as we see over here, is that if it's set to a 0, it's still going to use a default background. So right now, yes, this policy, this configuration of this policy is enabled. However, the background itself is still not changed. So I can disable it, and that means that I, as an administrator, cannot force a specific start background. It's disabled as a whole. So think about it, you're disabling or enabling the policy, not the configurations within it. All right, so it's important to remember that. So I'm just going to change this back to not configures. We don't really care too much about it. But again, look at some of the things that we can change on here. I don't care too much about that. But so this is the computer side of things. We don't really, we all be playing around with these things. However, you can play around with them as much as you want. You can poke around in here too as well. It's completely up to you. Most of the things that we'll be playing with here, to be completely honest with you, from a configuration standpoint, are going to be user configurations. So we can hide the add program from CD floppy, from Microsoft, from your network. We can hide a lot of things. We can remove them. We can remove add remove programs completely, so you cannot access it. Again, this is a way of securely locking down your machines, not allowing users to do X, Y, and Z. And what those X, Y, and Z variables are things that were within here. For instance, is that you can enable a screensaver. Let's look at it. If you disable this setting, screensavers do not run. You are disabling the feature, all right? So you are disabling this guy from running. Now, if you do not configure it, it has no effect. So we can enable it. We can disable it. If you enable it, a screensaver runs provided the following 2 conditions. First, a valid screensaver on the client is specified through that, or the screensaver timeout is set to a non-value 0. And what we actually do is we set those through the various settings as well on here. Is that force a specific screensaver. load a specific theme. Themes are really from a Windows 7 standpoint, where you can put the different themes on there if you wanted. You can actually choose. You have to actually find the theme file. There's some things that you can do with that. To be honest, not many people play around with it. Printers. You have the ability to play around with several things on here as well from a printer standpoint. However, one of the things that I want to really look at, and this allows us to really get granular. All right, so remember what we did before is we created an OU for lab users. All right, now imagine if we had different departments instead. So we had marketing, we had engineering, we had executives. All right, now all of those various departments probably have file shares, something related to their particular department that really other people shouldn't have. However, when they're logging into a computer, they should have some sort of drive maps. This is one way that we can actually do this, is we can create a new mapped drive. We can call it whatever we want. We have to set the location, of course, and we have to search entire Active Directory and all of that. We've got to have file and print sharing set up as well. And then what we can do is that we can automatically map those for you when you log in. Now here's the difference between a user configuration and a computer configuration. So think about it from this perspective, is that your computer, when you log in, and let's just say you're in the engineering department, let's just use an IT example, for instance. So you're in IT, you have IT folders from a file share that you need to install onto somebody's computer. So what will end up happening is that when you log into your computer, you will get those drive maps. However, if it's on a computer configuration and you're mapping drives, it'll only be isolated to those computers that you specify. So the reason why I use an IT example is that you're working on somebody else's computer, a user's computer, it's broken, you need to access your file share. You log in with your information, you're not going to get those map drives. However, if we log in and create a user configuration, is that follows the user no matter where they end up logging in at. That's the big difference between the two of them from a user and a computer configuration standpoint. So we are not going to actually change anything on here, but what we're going to do, so we're going to go ahead and close out. We're going to create a brand new group policy object. Group policy objects are obviously things that will manage and maintain your network. So let's right click, create a new, and let's call this one background. So we have a background. Right now the links is nowhere to be found. So what we have to do is we have to link a particular GPO. All right, and if we look at the settings, is that we're not going to show, we don't care about the general. Those are just delegation and various things. Again, not concerned with it. There are no settings defined for this OU. This is a very vanilla OU, or I'm sorry, group policy object. There's nothing set to it. So we have to configure it. So first and foremost, what we want to do is we want to we can do a couple different things, but what I want to do is take this background OU and link it. So we have to link it to an OU or to the domain. I don't want to apply this particular group policy object to the entire domain. I just want to apply it to this one particular lab OU. So we can right click and either create a brand new one and link it here, or link a existing GPO. For instance as well, this one that says block inheritance. So remember when I said that if you apply something to the domain itself, you can get this from time to time. I just hit OK. If you exist something to the domain, everything underneath is going to inherit it. So what we can do is actually block inheritance. So now this guy will not inherit any of the policies of the default domain policy. It will not inherit any of that stuff. So again, do we want to do it? Who knows? There are some times when you want to do this. Sometimes where you don't want things to change. You can make a separate OU, block all inheritance, and use it as a test OU if you want to as well. There's a lot of reasons you can get creative with this. So I do not want to block inheritance. I want to keep it as it is. We're going to link an existing GPO. We're going to click background. So if we open this up here, as you see, we got the background. All right, so what we want to do is we want to configure. So we're going to right click on it, and you can click on either one of them. It doesn't matter. This one up here is just a link to this one, so either one, it'll take you to the same spot. So we have a user configuration. We want to change the background. So when this person logs in onto this computer, to these computers, then they will it'll apply to them. So what we want to do is we want to go to desktop. Oops, sorry, not control panel. Desktop, under administrative templates, go to desktop. And then we'll have something on here. It's called desktop wallpaper. So if we double click on it, notice that the setting allows you to specify wallpaper for users' desktops. Enable the wallpaper name. So this is actually something we have to do, is that we have to do it by UNC path. So we actually have to type that in here. However, since we were smart, if we pull back up our notepad, we can right click, copy all of that, and then paste it in there. So what this policy is saying, and I'm going to go ahead and apply it, is that this background.jpg, has been added to the actual background has been added to all of the things that are in this OU, whether it be users or computers. Now we're going to play around here in just a minute. So right now, as it stands, the desktop wallpaper has been changed. So let's minimize this. It's linked already, so it's good to go. Minimize. All right, so we're back at our desktop here. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to pause for a second. We're going to load up our Windows 10 machines if you haven't already loaded up, or if you haven't shut it down. That Windows 10 machine, we're actually going to go through the process of binding it to the domain. So we're going to add it to our allowaylab.com, or whatever yours may be called. We're going to add that to our domain. So I'm going to pause here and then we'll come back. Okay, so go ahead and log back into your Windows 10 machine. You may get this is activate Windows. Don't worry about it right now. It's not that big of a deal. We're going to play around with this thing anyway. So what we want to do, and there's a couple ways that we can go about doing it. Go ahead and hit the power or the Windows button, hit the start menu. So this is where things get a little screwy, and I'm not a big fan, just because of the way that Windows 10 handles these things. So what we'll do, let's type in control panel, and let's bring up the control panel. Windows 10 is a little screwy with their settings. I'm not a big fan of it. I've always liked control panel, and it's just kind of my point of reference for everything. But what we'll do is we'll bring up control panel. So what we want to do is we want to click on System and Security, and then we want to click on System. And that'll bring us to this screen here. There's a couple other ways you can get to it. A Windows pause break will also bring you directly to the screen here. There's a couple ways you can get to it. However you get to it, by all means, get there. So we have this guy logged in here. We're ready to go. The computer name is set to what we had before, which is Client 1. And right now we're a member of a work group, so we are not able to communicate with the Active Directory domain. So what we want to do is we want to bind it to the Active Directory domain. So let's go ahead and click on Change Settings. And you're going to bring up this screen right here. We're going to click the word Change. We're going to keep the computer name as it is. However, we're going to put the bubble in Domain, and we're going to type in the name of our domain. Obviously, yours is not going to be Alloway Lab, but if everything works right, we should get a username and password. So this is where we have to type in the username of our administrator account, which is malloway, and password 1234. That's our password. Now, we can do one of a couple things. Now, what's going to end up happening is that when we're talking about Active Directory and we're looking at the accounts themselves, the administrator type accounts, what we have to actually do, and this is the same concept as when you log into the domain at Tri-C, what you have to do is you have to type in the NetBIOS name. Mine is ccc_network. I'm not sure what the student's one is, but it's something similar to that. So what we'll do is we'll do Alloway Lab /malloway. And that is what ours should be. And then go ahead and hit enter. Okay, if everything worked, make sure you just remember the username and the password that you created. If you don't know it, you can go back to the Active Directory users and computers where we created that user account. Look, make sure you have the correct name. So if everything works, you should get something that says welcome to the allowaylab.com domain. And that's going to do a little bit of thinking, and you must restart your computer. This is where things are very, very important, because right now is that we can't make any changes. And if we look, is that we're now part of the domain. However, we cannot make any changes to this computer. No effects will happen. Nothing will actually work until we restart the computer. So go ahead and hit close. It's going to ask you to restart. Go ahead, restart. It's going to shut you down, and I'm going to. Okay, so just to give everyone a for instance, the computer has been rebooted. However, what we're going to do is we're going to bring back up the client one here, and what we're going to do is we're going to log in to our computer, Alloway Lab /malloway, and then we're going to type in our password, and then we're going to go ahead and log in. Yes, we'll get this because this is a new, so go ahead and don't ask me. Let's configure the remote session. And let's log in. So we're going to give that a second to log in, and I'm going to swap over to our server because I want to show you guys something. If we go back to our Active Directory users and computers, we should notice something different now. If we go to the computers OU, we should see a new entry in there. You may have to refresh it. You can hit this little refresh button up here, or an F5 will work, either one. Let's go and double click it. So we'll notice that we have the client one is client1.allowaylab.com. We can see that is a Windows 10 Pro. It's a member of the domain computers, and we're not going to worry about these other things. We don't have any of these extra settings from a location standpoint and all of that. So all of these things here, this is now a member of Active Directory. So we have bound this particular computer to the domain. Now, what it's doing is that it is will get default domain policies. So let's look real quick, and I just want to show you. Keep an eye on where we're at. We're Alloway Lab and computers. So let's take a step back. We can close this out here, actually. So this guy right here, if we look at it, as we have Alloway Lab, we've created this background. This is only applied to one OU, and that's the Lab OU, Lab Users OU. So right now, as it stands, this computer that we're working on, it works. Why? Why does it work? It's not in the correct OU, but it works. Remember what I said earlier. We made a user configuration, not a computer configuration. All right? So there's a difference between the two of them. So when you log in as a user, and here's the interesting part, is that, so if we go back, in theory, I am logged into this guy, correct? So I am logged into it with my username and password. However, I notice that the group policy is still not working. Well, let's think about it for a minute. Why is it not working? Well, group policy works on a, we're going to bring up the command. Actually, you know what we're going to do? Instead of doing that, we're going to bring up command prompt. We're going to do it under administrator functions. So right click and run as administrator. So group policy works on a function, and the reason why it works in this scenario is because if you were to make a policy change in the middle of the day, every one of your computers, let's just say it was something small, obviously like a background change, it's pretty easy. However, let's think about if it was something different like mapping drives or something where it's changing some massive settings on the computer. Imagine if you made the change and immediately all computers that it affected had immediately took effect. What you would do is you completely overload all of your computers all at once and everything. It would be kind of a nightmare to work with. So what we have done here is that group policy has a built-in logic. And what it does is it has a cycle, and it's a 90-minute cycle. Every 90 minutes, group policy will be refreshed on a computer. Now, it's a different interval for every computer, of course, because it's when it was bound, and it goes on a 90-minute cycle from there. So every 90 minutes, group policy is refreshed. So let's think about for a second. This guy has been open and he's been running just fine. He hasn't had any issues. So do we have to wait 90 minutes? We could wait, in theory, anywhere from 1 second all the way up to 89 minutes and 59 seconds before that, where we are in that kind of interval, in that window. So there is a command, and we'll actually end up playing with a couple of them just to look and see on how this ultimately works, is that the computers, when they try to do their cycles every 90 minutes, like I said, it could be depending on where it's at. So what it does is it really load balances out that hassle of configuring all of these policies. Is that in theory, like, yes, some of your computers, is that only within 90-minute windows all of your computers will have this particular effect. Here's the thing that you got to think about with it, is that the flip side is that it's good if you're making massive changes to things in the middle of the day or whenever it may be. It's making a massive change to things, and it could, in theory, bury your network if it were to go immediate. However, the other thing around is that since it's not immediate, let's say you're making a change that like plugs a back door or something like that, you have, in theory, again, 89 minutes and 59 seconds before that policy could be applied to the computer. So there's a couple things that we can do on your computer to force it. All right, and it's this command. It's called GP update. And what we actually will do is a /force. And what we'll do is it'll create and it'll update the policy. So this is me telling it to refresh its domain policy. It'll change all of the updates, and you see that we do the computer policy update has completed successfully, and the user policy has completed successfully. So let's think about this for a second here. We have completed both of the policies successfully. So how do we know that what policies are applied on this computer? Well, let's look. GP result is a thing that we would be using. So I'm going to bring this up here is because what I really want is, there's a couple of them. We can use all of these switches. So it'd be GP result /S, and it would tell you, the system, remote system to connect to, so on and so forth. So you can do this kind of remotely. However, the easiest way to go about this is to do a /R, and it gives you a RSOP, and that stands for resultant set of policy. And really what this does is it tells you what policies are applied to the computer. So let's go ahead and we can hit up, and then we'll do a /R. And it will give you a resultant set of policy. So we have the group policy product, or the object is background. We see that it is applied, and we're under the user settings, but let's look it up from the top. Here's the computer settings. Default domain controller policy, default domain policy are both applied. We can see that the computer is part of the following security groups. We can see all of these. These are ones that we have somewhat discussed a little bit here and there, but we're not going to go too much more about it, to be honest. We can see that follows were not applied because they were filtered out. And everything has been, or nothing basically, is not applied. So there's no filtering. Nothing's been filtered. So from the user standpoint, is that I log in, I can see my name. I can see which OU I'm in. I can see the last time the group policy was updated. And if we look, and that was just 2 minutes ago, 10:23 at 12:30 in the afternoon, which, as I said, a couple minutes ago. So we have a couple things on here that I also want to keep in mind of. We have a slow link threshold. Is that if this computer, for whatever reason, has a link that is less than 500 kilobits per second, it will not apply group policy. Now I can change this slow link threshold as well. Another thing that we're looking at is that we have the applied group policy objects is the background. That background is applied. Why is it not working on this computer? Well, we'll play around with that here in just a second, but so the user is part of the following security groups, and I can actually see which groups I'm in. So let's look at it. I'm in everyone. And remember this group. I said that is a catch-all. That is an everybody type group. And that group is literally every single person, whether you're authenticated or not, whether you should be there, whether you shouldn't be there. That is a group that everyone is involved in. So when we gave that access to everyone to that network share, everybody does have access to it. So we're administrators. These are built in, so these would be computer administrators. So I'm a computer administrator. Some of these others I'm not going to worry about. Authenticated users, obviously very important. I'm also a member of the domain administrators. These are all important groups, and we'll kind of discuss them here a little bit more in the next couple weeks with Active Directory sites and services, and also with the actual the force design as well. So here are all of our things that we have done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to restart this computer to allow it to refresh. Sometimes things just don't work, and that happens. What we'll do is that I will reboot this computer and we'll come back because I want it to apply. Okay, and we're back. So a simple reboot of the computer took care of it, as we can see. Why would a reboot take care of it? However, let's think about it from a standpoint of how the computers log in themselves. So in order to change the background, is that yes, it can work during. You can change it whenever you want. However, especially from a background perspective, when you're changing the background, you're making changes, configurations. 9 times out of 10, what you have to do for most configurations is you have to either A, sign out of the computer, so basically log on, log off, or reboot it completely. It does the exact same thing. That kind of leads you to the same scenario. But the important thing is to log on and log off, because new processes, and especially most group policies, get processed. All right, so they may be applied to the computer, but they're not processed. So when they're processed during login, and that's during the login session. Sometimes you'll notice on certain computers, sometimes companies have way too many group policies that take effect, and they're really locking down their computers for one reason or another. And it will really slow down. The login process sometimes can take like a minute or two, and it's very annoying for some people. So they'll log into the computer, and by the time everything's set up and done, then they'll go to the bathroom, and then hopefully by the time they come back, everything should be loaded and they can actually use their computer. Again, these are all things you got to think of when you're designing a group policy. So that was the final piece of the group policy. This is just I'm not kidding you, the tip of the iceberg when we're talking about group policy and what you can configure. So what I want from a lab standpoint is I want you to show me a screenshot of there's going to be 3 of them that we're going to need. So if we go to the administrative tools, I want to see Active Directory users and computers. I want to see client 1 in the computer's OU. Now we'll play around with that later when we made that desktop OU. We can move it, but we're not going to do that today. So I want to see client 1 in the desktop. Screenshot of this. I want to see the group policy that you created to change the background. So we'll go to our group policy management. And I want to see background, and I want to see applied to lab users. Okay, so we see that it's obviously a part of that. So within the background, I want to see a screenshot of this. And then finally, the last thing that I want to see is, oops, wrong one, on your Windows 10 machine, I want to see the background of whatever picture you ultimately chose. Like I said, it doesn't matter. Pick whatever you want. The only thing I'm concerned about is the fact that you changed this background. All right, so those 3 things are going to be your lab assignment, and that will be it for this week.